So how does a photon, like, actually know it's supposed to obey the laws of physics? I mean, really think about that for a second.
Great.
Did an electron go to math class? Did it sit down and memorize the Schrödinger equation before it decided exactly how to orbit a nucleus?
It is a profound, almost dangerously childlike question. And the irony is, it's the exact kind of question that modern institutional physics just, you know, quietly gave up on answering.
Exactly. We just accept the rules as given.
Yeah, we become so obsessed with predicting what a particle will do that we completely stopped asking how it knows what to do in the first place.
We act like the laws of physics are some, I don't know, some invisible police force out there with radar guns forcing reality to comply. But today we are welcoming you to a deep dive that absolutely refuses to just accept those rules.
We really are.
We are looking at a document that strips everything back to zero and asks where the bedrock of reality actually came from. Our source material today is this incredibly ambitious, dense, and frankly revolutionary manuscript dated May 15th, 2026.
It's quite the read.
It really is. It's titled NKE, The First Theory of Everything by Art Meyer. And specifically, we are looking at version 1.1.
And the mission of this deep dive, the reason we are spending this time with you today, is to meticulously unpack this radical framework. It is an attempt to explain the absolute origin of reality itself.
Right.
And the most striking thing is what it doesn't use. It doesn't use highly complex 11-dimensional mathematics. It attempts to build the universe from pure bottom-up emergent logic.
Which is wild because normally when someone drops the phrase theory of everything or TOE, you instinctively brace yourself for chalkboards covered in Greek symbols and equations that would make Einstein sweat.
Exactly, yeah.
But this source material takes a totally different route. And before we even get into the actual gears and levers of how this NKE universe works, we need to talk about the format of the document itself.
The format is key.
Because it's explicitly labeled version 1.1, and there is this fascinating preamble where the author explains why it's essentially being released out into the world as an unfinished draft.
It's what we might call the software release approach to theoretical physics.
Right.
The author deliberately pushed this manuscript out into the public sphere, knowing full well that it's too long, that it might contain contradictions, and that the language is incredibly dense. And he outlines two very specific, very human reasons for doing this.
I found this part so relatable.
Right. The first is simply the burden of personal cognitive load. I want you to just imagine carrying the weight of a fundamental question about the origin of existence in your head, actively processing it for nearly 50 years.
50 years, half a century of just letting that single question, how does reality assemble itself from nothing, marinate in your brain, that kind of obsession has to be isolating.
It is isolating and eventually becomes paralyzing. He states that he fundamentally needed to release it just to be able to breathe. He needed to externalize it to get the psychological distance required to keep refining it.
Like putting down a heavy backpack.
Exactly. It's the intellectual equivalent of putting down a massive boulder you've been carrying up a mountain just so you can stretch your arms.
And the second reason he released it in this version 1.1 state is a direct call for global collaboration, right?
Precisely. The author possesses the self-awareness to realize that a true theory of everything is structurally too massive for one human brain to finalize. It cannot be a solo project.
It's too big.
Way too big. It requires a massive interdisciplinary collision of minds. Physicists, yes, but also mathematicians, philosophers, cognitive scientists, and honestly just deeply curious people who are willing to poke holes in it.
He specifically mentions wanting to completely move away from this concept called the Nuremberg funnel. I had to look this up, actually.
Oh, the German metaphor, right?
Yeah, the Nuremberger Trichter, which is essentially this humorous, slightly cynical idea that a teacher can just take a metal funnel, stick it into the head of a student, and pour finished, perfect knowledge directly into their brain.
Right, and traditional physics is often taught exactly like that. Here's the equation, memorize it, don't ask what the equation is actually made of.
Yeah, just shut up and calculate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The author is rejecting that model entirely. He doesn't want to pour a finished theory into your head. He's inviting the reader to actively wrestle with the concepts, to struggle with the logical planks he's laying down, and to help build the rest of the bridge.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can truly evaluate the bridge he's building, we have to look at the chasm he's trying to cross. We have to ask a historical question.
Which is?
Why did the greatest minds in physics, the Einsteins, the Hawkings, the Bohrs, Why did the entire institutional field essentially abandon the search for a true mechanical theory of everything almost a century ago?
That historical context is arguably the most crucial starting point of this entire manuscript. Around the year 1930, theoretical physics slammed headfirst into a massive, seemingly impenetrable wall.
A brick wall.
Or rather, they hit two distinct roadblocks that fundamentally broke the confidence of the scientific community, convincing them that a true toe was, well, a philosophical impossibility.
All right, let's look at those roadblocks. What was the first thing that scared off the geniuses?
The first roadblock was strictly mathematical, and it came from a logician named Kurt Gödel, specifically Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Right, I've heard of this.
It's dense, but to distill a very complex proof down to its core, Gödel proved mathematically that within any sufficiently complex logical or mathematical system, there will always be statements that are demonstrably true, but which absolutely cannot be proven from within the rules of that system.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. If the universe itself is the system, Gödel is saying we can't mathematically prove everything about the universe while we are trapped inside it. Like trying to see your own eyeballs without a mirror.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it, yeah. A theory of everything must, by its very definition, encompass the entirety of reality. Therefore, there is no objective outside platform for a physicist to stand on to write a perfect, complete proof.
Because they're part of the equation.
Exactly. You can never achieve a 100% deductive mathematical certainty about the box you are currently living inside. Gödel essentially shattered the dream of the perfect self-contained world formula that could be neatly written on a chalkboard and proven without a shadow of a doubt.
Wow. I mean, that is a heavy philosophical blow for a discipline entirely reliant on mathematical proof. If the math says the math can't finish the job, what do you do?
You panic, mostly.
Yeah, clearly. And what was the second roadblock?
The second roadblock is older but equally devastating. It's the who created the creator paradox.
Oh, boy.
It is the ultimate trap of linear causality. If you try to write a theory of the universe and you say, in the beginning, there was a tiny, incredibly dense particle, or in the beginning, there was a mathematical law, the immediate, unavoidable logical question is,
where did the particle come from? Where did the law come from?
exactly.
Right. If you use standard A leads to B logic, you just get stuck in an infinite loop. It's like a 4-year-old endlessly asking why to every answer you give them.
It is exactly like that.
You can never find the true absolute beginning because every starting point you define automatically requires a precursor to explain its own existence.
Exactly. So, faced with these twin nightmares, Gödel proving you can't perfectly mathematically model the system from the inside, and the causality paradox proving you can't logically start the system with a thing, physicists found themselves paralyzed.
So what did they do? Did they just, like, pack up their chalk and go home?
The text argues that they didn't stop doing physics, obviously. They just changed their focus. They started looking in the light.
Oh, this reminds me of the old joke. The guy is walking home at night and sees his neighbor crawling around under a streetlight on his hands and knees.
Yes, the classic joke.
He asks, "What are you looking for?" The neighbor says, "I lost my keys." The guy asks, "Did you drop them around here?" And the neighbor says, "No, I dropped them in the dark alley over there, but the light is much better over here."
That is precisely the metaphor the author is evoking. For the last century, physicists moved entirely into areas where it was comfortable to work, where they could secure funding, publish papers, and build careers.
In the light.
In the light. They built incredibly elegant, hyper-complex mathematical models. We're talking about string theory, extra dimensions, quantum loop gravity.
The streetlight.
The streetlight. These are top-down approaches. They are beautiful, highly complex formulas that exist in the light of pure mathematics. But the NKE text argues that to find the actual origin of reality, the keys to the universe, you have to look in the dark alley.
Into the unknown.
You have to look into the absolute featureless nothingness where reality actually begins, far before complex math even has anything to measure.
Okay, let me stop you there because I really have to push back on this premise.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't math the ultimate truth of the universe? We hear this constantly in pop science, the universe is built out of math, or God is a mathematician. If we want to find the ultimate truth, why wouldn't we use the ultimate tool?
That is the dominant paradigm, yes, but the author of NKE makes a sharp, controversial distinction. The text argues forcefully that math does not emerge from the universe, and the universe is certainly not made of math.
Wait, really?
Really. Instead, mathematics is entirely independent of physical reality. It is a perfect, incorruptible measuring stick. It is the ultimate map.
Ah, a map, but not the territory.
Exactly. Let's say you have the most perfectly detailed map of the Autobahn. It shows every curve, every elevation change, every rest stop with flawless precision. That map is vital for understanding how traffic flows on the road. But the map is absolutely not the asphalt. The map tells you nothing about how the asphalt was forged from oil and rock, or how the dirt underneath it was compacted.
Okay, I see the distinction now.
The text asserts that the mainstream physics community spent the last 90 years drawing increasingly perfect maps with mathematics, arguing over which map has prettier lines. But a true toe has to explain the asphalt.
It has to explain the dirt.
It has to explain the fundamental ontological mechanism of reality. It has to explain what is actually happening, not just calculate the trajectory of the result.
That reframes the entire problem.
Hmm.
If we can't rely on a perfect mathematical proof because of Gödel, and we can't use standard cause and effect because of the infinite regress of the creator paradox, how do we even take the first step? If we are in the dark alley, how do we walk?
The author provides a very specific methodological framework for this. He calls it the SUMP model, the swamp model.
The swamp model. Paint that picture for us.
Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast, incredibly murky, fog-covered swamp. This swamp represents the dark alley, everything we do not know about the absolute origin of the universe.
The swamp of ignorance.
Exactly. Far off in the distance, barely visible, is the solid ground of our known, measurable reality. That solid ground is our daily life, biology, chemistry, standard model physics. Your goal is to build a path across this swamp of ignorance to connect the absolute origin to our daily reality.
But the mud is the paradoxes. If I try to pour a heavy concrete road of traditional deductive mathematical proof right into the mud, it's just going to sink. It can't hold its own weight.
Right. It sinks. So what do? You don't build a concrete road. First, you look out into the swamp, and you find the very few isolated things that you are absolutely, undeniably certain of. You plant flags in the mud.
Flags.
These flags are basic, unshakable truths.
What does a flag look like in this context? I mean, what are we absolutely certain of?
A flag might be a simple observation, like, I exist, and I am observing. Another flag might be an empirical fact. There are exactly 95 naturally occurring stable chemical elements.
Okay.
Another flag might be time appears to only flow in one direction. You plant these flags of absolute certainty.
Okay, so we have these little islands of certainty scattered out in the fog, but they aren't connected yet.
Not yet. The next step is to start laying logical planks between these flags. You build careful, logical associations. You don't use heavy math. You use pure, emergent logic.
Just stepping from one truth to the next.
Exactly. You carefully walk from one island of certainty to the next. You don't claim to know exactly what the bottomless mud beneath you is made of, but you build a structural framework that successfully gets you across.
And if a plank cracks, if we learn something new that breaks the logic,
You pull the plank up, and you lay a new one that fits the new data. But the point is, you are relying on fundamental, bottom-up logical coherence, not top-down mathematical assumptions. Which brings us to the rules of construction.
yes. Because if we are laying these planks across the swamp of the unknown, we need incredibly strict rules for how to build them. We can't just throw any random piece of philosophical wood down and call it a bridge.
No, that would be a disaster.
The author defines these construction rules as lemata. These are the non-negotiable constraints. Any theory claiming to be a theory of everything must obey these lemata, or it sinks.
What is genuinely fascinating here is how the text uses these lemata to systematically strip away all of our comfortable traditional assumptions about reality.
It's ruthless.
It forces the reader to stop thinking about particles, gravity, and energy as fundamental given things. We have to wipe the slate entirely clean and look only at the absolute minimum logical requirements for reality to function.
Let's really dig into these because they fundamentally rewrite how you view the world around you. Let's look at Lemma 1 and Lemma 2. They deal with this concept of complete emergence. What does the author mean by that?
Complete emergence dictates that absolutely everything in the universe, every physical property, every particle, every force, and every physical law must emerge from a simpler state.
From the bottom up.
Exactly. Nothing, absolutely nothing is given. You cannot say, well, the universe just has gravity. You have to explain how gravity emerges from something that is not gravity.
It's the ultimate ban on magic. You can't just wave a wand and insert a fully formed concept into the universe.
Precisely. And Lemma 2 adds a critical layer to this. Things only happen because they cannot happen otherwise.
Oh, that's interesting.
There is no external choreographer. There is no master blueprint. The staggeringly complex behavior we see in the cosmos is just the inevitable, unavoidable result of incredible simple things doing the only action available to them.
The author uses a really grounding analogy here, and it's one I think perfectly illustrates emergence: the anthill.
Walk us through it.
Think about an anthill. You look at it from the outside, and it is a marvel of complex architecture. There are specialized ventilation shafts to control temperature, there are nurseries for the larvae, there are defense perimeters, there are waste disposal areas.
It looks engineered.
Exactly. If a human built it, it would require blueprints, engineers, and a project manager. It looks entirely designed, but if you isolate a single ant and examine its brain, that architectural blueprint is not in there.
No, the ant has absolutely no concept of a ventilation shaft.
Right. The ant is fundamentally stupid. It is just following incredibly basic local rules. If it smells a specific chemical pheromone, it picks up a grain of dirt. If it bumps into another ant, it drops the dirt.
Simple inputs, simple outputs.
Yeah. Ant plus dirt plus local chemical signals equals an anthill. The massive, beautiful complexity of the anthill emerges entirely from the blind interaction of simple localized parts. The anthill isn't a fundamental truth of the forest, it's an emergent property.
And the staggering claim of the NKE theory is that everything in physics is an anthill.
Everything.
A quark is an anthill. A photon is an anthill. A black hole is an anthill. None of them are fundamental. They're all emergent structures built from simpler, blind interactions.
That completely reorganizes how you look at a textbook. Okay, so we need emergence. What about lemma 3? The text calls it symmetry breaking. Why is symmetry a problem? Shouldn't a perfect universe be perfectly symmetrical?
That is an aesthetic human assumption, but logically it's a dead end. The text states unequivocally that a universe with perfect symmetry is a dead, completely featureless universe. Yes. Think about perfect balance. If every force is perfectly matched by an equal opposite force everywhere, if every positive is perfectly neutralized by a negative, at the exact same moment, nothing happens. It is a smooth, static, eternal nothingness.
It's like two people pushing against a door from opposite sides with the exact same amount of strength. The door never opens. The situation is perfectly symmetrical, but zero work gets done.
Exactly. To get structure, to get movement, to get anything resembling reality, you need an imperfection. You need one person to slip. You need a break in the symmetry.
A shattered mirror. A perfect mirror just blindly reflects light, has no features of its own. But a shattered mirror catches the light differently on every jagged edge. It creates a mosaic, it creates a structure. Reality requires the shatter.
A beautiful way to conceptualize it. Which leads us to lemma 6, eternal process. This lemma directly challenges one of the most deeply ingrained concepts in popular science, the standard view of the Big Bang.
Oh, this one broke my brain a little bit. We are so conditioned to think of creation as a historical event. The universe was born 13.8 billion years ago. There was a giant explosion, and we are basically just living in the cooling aftermath.
Right, we think we're the debris.
Exactly, we are the debris.
Lemma 6 fundamentally rejects that one-and-done narrative. It states the fundamental mechanism, the core process that initially separated nothingness into reality, did not just happen once, 13.8 billion years ago, and stop.
It's still going.
It is happening right now. It is constantly running, vibrating at every single mathematical point in space, continuously generating reality.
So the reality I am sitting in right now isn't a leftover artifact. It is actively being generated. It's like a movie projector. Standard physics treats the Big Bang like the flash of a camera had happened, and now we are just looking at the photograph. But NKE says it's a projector. The bulb is currently burning. The reel is currently spinning, throwing the image of reality onto the screen of space.
The terrifying, awe-inspiring corollary to that is if the projector were to suddenly stop, the universe wouldn't just freeze in place like a paused video game.
Oh, wow.
It wouldn't slowly fade away. If the underlying process stopped, reality would instantly cease to exist. It would collapse back into nothingness. The universe requires constant, active maintenance by this fundamental process.
That makes the universe feel incredibly fragile, but also incredibly dynamic. It's an ongoing performance. All right, let's tackle lemma 10, because this is where I think mainstream physicists might start throwing their textbooks at the wall.
I wouldn't blame them.
The text strictly forbids action at a distance.
This is a massive philosophical line in the sand. Action at a distance is the idea that two objects can physically affect each other across empty space without anything physically connecting them.
Right, but wait, that's how we describe basically everything. We say gravity pulls the Earth toward the sun across 93 million miles of empty vacuum. We say a magnet pulls a piece of iron across a table. How can the author ban that? It happens.
The author isn't denying that the Earth orbits the sun or that magnets work. He's denying the mechanism of invisible magical reaching.
The invisible rubber band.
Yes. NKE dictates that there are no invisible rubber bands. There are no spooky, disembodied forces reaching across the void. Any physical effect can only occur through the direct physical interaction of adjacent structures.
Okay, so how do you explain gravity or magnetism without a rubber band?
Think of a completely packed concert venue. Thousands of people, shoulder to shoulder.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If someone at the back of the crowd gets shoved, they fall into the person in front of them, who falls into the person in front of them, creating a wave of pressure. Eventually, someone at the very front row gets pushed into the stage barrier.
The mosh pit effect.
Exactly. The person at the back did not magically act at a distance upon the person in the front row. There was a localized physical transfer of pressure through adjacent units.
So if the universe is the crowded room, space isn't empty.
Exactly. Space cannot be an empty void if forces are moving through it. Space itself must be a continuous physical medium, a mesh, and what we call forces are simply waves of relative pressure and density moving sequentially through that mesh. We will get to exactly what that mesh is made of shortly.
That perfectly sets up the final rule we need to discuss. Lemma 12, the circumstantial proof, or indizim beweis.
This brings us back to Gödel and the swamp. Because we established that we cannot build a perfect deductive mathematical proof from inside the universe, we have to change our methodology. The text explicitly compares the physicist to a detective, specifically invoking Sherlock Holmes.
So we aren't mathematicians proving a theorem, we are detectives building a case.
We must gather clues, the flags in our swamp. We look at the 95 elements, we look at gravity, we look at the speed of light, and we build a circumstantial case. We create a profile of the suspect, the fundamental engine of the universe.
And then we test it.
We test our profile against every single clue. If our proposed engine explains all the clues naturally, without requiring us to invent magical exceptions, we accept it as our working reality, even if we can never write it out as a deductive mathematical proof on a blackboard.
Okay, I am strapped in. We have mapped the swamp. We have our rigorous rules, our lemmata. We know everything must emerge. We know we need symmetry breaking. We know it's an active process happening everywhere right now. And we know there is no spooky action at a distance.
The stage is set.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What is the actual engine? If we take a microscope and zoom in past human biology, past molecules, past atoms, past quarks, past quantum fields, what is the fundamental bedrock process that is actually creating everything from absolute nothingness?
The author provides us with two specific acronyms to define this ultimate engine. The overarching conceptual framework is NKE.
Which stands for?
Nix, Christa, etwas. In English, nothing. Crust. Something.
Nothing. Crust. Something. That sounds like the world's most confusing baking recipe.
It is the ultimate recipe, and it directly addresses that who created the creator paradox we discussed earlier.
All right.
If you start your theory with a hyperdense quantum dot, someone will ask who made the dot. So NKE starts with the absolute only state that requires zero explanation, zero precursors, and zero energy. Absolute nothingness. Nix. A state with mathematically zero properties.
Okay, I can accept nothingness as a starting point. It requires no creator. But we run into an immediate problem. Lemma 1 says everything must emerge. The universe can't do magic. You can't pull a rabbit out of a hat if there's no hat, no rabbit, and no magician. How do you get from absolute zero properties to a physical universe?
It requires an action, but an action that does not violate the nothingness. The only possible logical action that can occur within absolute nothingness to create a property, a difference, is a separation.
A separation of nothing.
The theory proposes that the nothingness is separated by an infinitely thin, completely virtual boundary. The author calls this boundary the crust, or crust.
Hold on, I'm struggling to visualize this. How do you cut nothing in half? What is the crust made of?
The crust isn't made of anything physical. Think of it as a purely logical distinction. Imagine a completely blank, infinite, featureless white piece of paper. Now imagine drawing an infinitely thin geometric line right down the middle.
Okay.
Because the line is infinitely thin, you haven't actually added any ink to the paper. The total amount of ink is still zero.
Okay, the line has no physical reality.
But logically, merely by conceptualizing that boundary, you now have a left side and a right side. You've created a difference. You've created a property where none existed before without actually adding any material substance to the system.
I see. But because that line, that crust, is infinitely thin and has no physical substance, it can't actually hold the two sides apart.
Precisely. It is unstable by definition.
Yeah.
And because it's infinitely thin, the separation immediately collapses back on itself. The two theoretical halves of nothingness instantly rush back together to reunite into perfect, featureless nothingness.
It just snaps back.
This two-part action, the virtual separation and the immediate collapse, is the heartbeat of the universe, and it is driven by the second acronym, the Busfo process.
Okay, let's break down BUSFO. BUSFO. What does that stand for?
It stands for binär, unendlich schnell und fein omnipresent. Let's translate that: binary, infinitely fast and fine, omnipresent.
Let's take those one by one. Binary because it's just separating into two parts, left and right, positive and negative. Infinitely fine because it is the absolute smallest possible logical action. It has no physical size.
Right.
Omnipresent, meaning this isn't just happening at one central point in space. It is happening at every conceivable mathematical coordinate simultaneously and continuously.
Correct. But the most counterintuitive part is unendlich schnell, infinitely fast.
Yeah, why does it have to be infinitely fast? Nothing in our universe travels at infinite speed. The speed of light is the absolute speed limit.
True, in our evolved universe.
Yeah.
But at this completely pre-physical stage, there is no mass, there are no particles, there is no spatial distance, there is absolutely no physical structure to provide drag or resistance.
Oh, I see.
It is pure, unhindered logic executing itself. Without resistance, the separation and collapse occur at infinite speed.
So nothingness virtually separates into two nothings and instantly collapses back into nothing, over and over, infinitely fast, everywhere. But wait, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here.
Let's hear it.
If nothing separates and perfectly collapses back into nothing, we still just have nothing. The math still equals zero. Where does the this something come from? How do I get a coffee cup out of this?
This is where we bring back lemma 3 symmetry breaking. This is the stroke of emergent genius in the theory. Remember, if the system is perfectly symmetrical, the universe remains dead and featureless. So the theory postulates that this infinitely fast omnipresent separation and collapse is not perfectly symmetrical.
It's flawed.
Yes. When the two halves of the virtual separation rush back together at infinite speed, they do not perfectly align to cancel each other out completely.
It's like taking a piece of paper, ripping it in half, and then trying to tape it back together seamlessly. Even if you are incredibly careful, you can never match the microscopic fibers perfectly. There is always a tiny, jagged ridge where the edges meet. A scar.
A perfect analogy. In the Busfo process, this tiny, persistent misalignment, this scar of imperfect collapse, leaves behind a physical trace. The text terms these traces verwaist resonanzen, or orphaned resonances.
Orphaned resonances.
They are tiny, persistent vibrations. They are fractions of a difference that fail to find their exact opposite half to cancel out into zero.
They are the microscopic leftovers of nothingness failing to fix itself perfectly. And these orphans just stick around.
Yes, and here's where the philosophy becomes physical reality.
Ooh.
This persistent difference, this orphan that refuses to vanish, is the actual, literal birth of time.
Wait, what? How does a leftover vibration create time? I always thought time was just a pre-existing dimension, like an empty hallway that the universe was placed inside.
That is a common misconception that NKE dismantles. Think about the system before the symmetry break. When the separation perfectly canceled out into nothing, there was absolutely no difference between before the separation and after the collapse. It was a perfect, seamless loop of nothing.
If nothing changes, time has no meaning.
Exactly. But the exact moment you have an orphaned resonance, a tiny scar of difference that persists, you can suddenly look at the system and say, this current state contains a scar. The previous state did not.
And a sequence of differing states is the fundamental definition of time moving forward.
Time is not a hallway. Time is an emergent property of persistent difference. It is the ticking clock created by the orphans. And furthermore, if you have a persistent difference, it needs logical room to exist. It requires a relationship to other differences.
Space.
Thus, space emerges to hold the structure. Space and time are not the stage. They're the emergent byproduct, the exhaust fumes of the Busfo process failing to be perfectly symmetrical.
That completely reorganizes my brain. Space and time are just the fiction marks of a vibrating logical engine. But I have a massive critical question here, and I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
We are talking about creating orphaned vibrations, which eventually build structure, which eventually build stars. Aren't we massively violating the first law of thermodynamics? How do we get all this energy to build a universe out of absolute nothingness? You can't just get a free lunch on a cosmic scale.
It is the most natural objection to raise, and the author anticipates it completely. The text is mathematically and logically clear. This process does not violate the conservation of energy. The total, absolute net energy of the entire NKE universe is still exactly zero.
How can you possibly say that? I'm looking around right now. The lights are on. My computer is drawing power. The sun is undergoing nuclear fusion outside. It looks like a massive amount of positive energy.
It is a massive amount of positive energy, but we are existing entirely on borrowed energy. Let's go back to the symmetry break. The virtual crust splits the nothingness into what we can conceptualize as a positive wave and a negative wave.
Left and right.
Up and down.
Right. They're supposed to perfectly cancel back to zero. But because this process is happening at infinite speed with infinite density absolutely everywhere, the environment is unimaginably chaotic. These spherical waves are crashing into each other.
Like a stormy ocean. Because of this chaos, many of these positive waves get knocked off their trajectory. They simply cannot find their exact negative partner to cancel out with. They become unpaired. They are orphaned.
So you have a positive wave trapped over here, vibrating away, and its corresponding negative wave is trapped somewhere else, completely separated by the chaos.
Essentially, yes. And the mind-blowing conclusion is the entire physical universe that we experience, the stars, the planets, the device you are listening to this on, and your own biological body is constructed entirely out of these trapped, orphaned, positive resonances.
We're built out of the positive orphan.
Yes. But somewhere out there in the infinite underlying mesh, the exact corresponding negative debt exists. Every ounce of positive energy in a supernova has a corresponding negative resonance trapped elsewhere.
The bill is still due.
If you were to somehow sum up the entire infinite system, the grand total is still zero. But locally, in our little bubble, we get to experience this incredible, complex symphony of borrowed positive energy.
That explains so much. It explains why the universe can exist without a creator adding energy. It's a zero-sum game played on a cosmic scale.
The text also notes that this neatly explains why our observable universe appears to be endlessly expanding and increasing in energy. It's just more and more of these orphaned positive resonances piling up, failing to cancel out, aggregating in the infinite mesh.
Okay, let me pause and try to summarize this because we are incredibly deep in the conceptual woods, and I want to make sure I'm keeping my feet on the planks of our swamp bridge.
Take your time.
We start with absolute nothingness. It virtually splits and collapses infinitely fast, the Busfo process. Imperfections in this collapse leave behind orphaned positive and negative vibrations. These vibrations create the concept of time and space. And because this is happening omnipresently, what we are left with is an infinite, microscopic, vibrating, three-dimensional mesh of these tiny logical cells.
Right.
The text calls it the Busfo geflecht, right?
Yeah.
The Busfo mesh.
That is a perfect summary. We have successfully scaled up from pre-physical nothingness into a physical reality. The Busfo mesh is the fundamental fabric of existence. It is the ether. It is the crowded room. But, as you're likely wondering, a chaotic vibrating mesh of microscopic nothingness is a long way from a solid planet. How do we scale up?
Exactly. If this Busfo process is happening at infinite speed, why isn't the universe just a blinding, instantaneous blur? Why doesn't a flashlight beam travel from Earth to Mars instantly? Why does light have a strict speed limit of 300,000 kilometers per second?
This brings us to a mechanical concept the text calls the Mitzi effect, which translates to the drag effect. This is arguably the most crucial mechanical element for understanding how the universe self-limits and creates what we call forces.
Explain the drag. Where does the friction come from if there are no particles yet?
Imagine the Busfo process occurring at a single, isolated mathematical point. It creates an orphaned resonance. Now, because this process is omnipresent, this orphaned vibration tries to expand radially, outward in a perfect sphere in every direction at infinite speed.
Like a shockwave.
Like an infinite speed shockwave. But here is the catch. It is not occurring at a single point. It is occurring at every point. So as that spherical shockwave of resonance ripples outward, it immediately smashes into the infinite speed spherical shockwaves, expanding from every single adjacent point around it.
It's an infinite traffic jam. Everyone is trying to accelerate to infinity, but they instantly rear-end the car in front of them, which is also rear-ending a car.
Precisely. They logically interfere with each other. This continuous omnipresent self-interference creates an internal friction within the mesh itself. The mesh drags on
So
itself.
the Mitzi effect.
Yes, and the NKE theory makes a monumental claim here. This internal drag effect is exactly what we experience as gravity.
Okay, hold on. Let me wrestle with that. You're saying gravity isn't a pulling force, but if I take my pen right now and I let go of it, it doesn't just drag or slow down. It actively accelerates downward toward my desk. How does a generic traffic jam in the universe pull my pen down to the earth?
It requires visualizing density. The Earth is a massive, incredibly dense aggregation of these stable resonances. The empty space around the Earth is less dense. Therefore, the traffic jam, the Mitzi effect, is vastly more intense inside and near the Earth than it is in empty space.
The mesh is thicker.
Yes. And remember, lemma 10, no action at a distance. Your pen is resting in the mesh. The mesh beneath the pen, toward the Earth, is highly dense and creating massive drag. The mesh above the pen is less dense.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The physical differential in this drag pressure essentially pulls or allows the pen to fall toward the area of higher density. Gravity is not a rubber band. It is the localized density gradient of the Busfo mesh interfering with itself.
That is staggering. Gravity is just the universe tripping over its own shoelaces. And does this drag effect explain the speed of light, too?
Absolutely. The drag effect acts as the universal speed limit governor. It caps the infinite speed of the raw underlying Busfo process down to a finite measurable speed for any complex structure trying to travel through the mesh. The absolute maximum speed a stable resonance can ripple through this self-interfering traffic jam without falling apart is c, the speed of light.
So the speed of light isn't just some arbitrary magical number that Einstein discovered on a chalkboard. It is the absolute mechanical maximum speed a wave can push through the friction of the Busfo mesh.
Exactly.
It grounds the physical constants in logical emergence rather than just saying, well, the universe just happens to like the number 300,000.
It removes the magic entirely.
Yeah.
But we still have a major hurdle. We have a self-limiting traffic jam of chaotic vibrations. How on earth does a chaotic traffic jam naturally organize itself into a perfectly stable atom of carbon or a strand of DNA? Traffic jams usually don't spontaneously turn into beautiful, functioning machines.
Right. If I throw a bunch of symbols down a staircase, I get noise. I don't get a Mozart symphony. How does the universe filter the noise?
To explain this filtering mechanism, the author invokes a real, incredibly complex mathematical concept, Falting's theorem.
Okay, I'm going to need Falting's theorem translated into plain English because algebraic geometry is not my strong suit.
I don't blame you. In the 1980s, a mathematician named Gerd Faltings proved a major conjecture. Without getting bogged down in the math, the NKE text uses the spirit of this theorem to explain the behavior of infinite chaos. It demonstrates that within an infinitely complex, chaotic sea of varying frequencies and vibrations, the system cannot remain purely chaotic forever.
It has to settle.
It will naturally self-organize. It will mathematically settle into a finite, discrete number of stable, recurring resonance patterns.
It finds its equilibrium. Like, okay, think about a wine glass. If I blast a wine glass with pure white noise, which contains every frequency of sound, the glass doesn't just vibrate chaotically. It filters that noise and only rings out at its one specific resonant frequency. The chaos is filtered into a single, stable, clear musical note.
That is a phenomenal way to picture it. The raw Busfo mesh is the ultimate white noise. It contains infinite chaotic frequencies of vibration, but due to the mathematical principles reflected in Falting's theorem, that white noise naturally filters down. It aggregates into a specific set of stable harmonic chords.
And what are these stable chords?
These stable, endlessly repeating resonance loops are what traditional physics calls subatomic particles, quarks, electrons, bosons. NKE is saying they are not tiny, solid billiard balls. They are not physical objects. They are just the stable harmonic chords ringing out in the Busfo mesh.
Which brings up one of the most poetic, mind-bending quotes in the entire manuscript. The author writes, "Strukturiertes nichts fast strukturiertes nix en."
Structured nothingness touches structured nothingness. It completely, utterly demolishes the human illusion of solid matter.
I want you, listening to this, to clap your hands together. Just clap. When you do that, your brain tells you that solid skin and bone just hit solid skin and bone. But NKE says there is nothing solid there.
Nothing solid at all. When you clap your hands, it is simply the highly stabilized, tightly bound resonant chords of nothingness in your left hand, electromagnetically repelling the highly stabilized resonant chords of nothingness in your right hand.
It's just wave.
It's waves of pressure pushing against waves of pressure in a sea of drag.
We are literally just complex music made of zero-point vibrations playing against ourselves. That is hauntingly beautiful.
And once you establish these stable basic chords, the fundamental particles, the process of complete emergence continues to scale up. The universe builds its immense complexity through aggregation, driven constantly by that density drag effect, gravity. The text outlines this macro timeline as the three bangs.
The three bangs. Standard cosmology gives us one big bang, everything explodes out and then just sort of drifts and cools down. But NKE says that's not enough to build a human. We need a series of cosmic forges. Walk me through the timeline of our specific reality.
It begins with an unimaginably long period of incredibly slow accumulation. Over perhaps 100 billion years, the absolute weakest, most basic harmonic structures in the Busfo mesh slowly clump together due to the drag effect. The text equates these weak, early, diffuse structures to what we currently observe and call dark matter.
Wait, really? Physicists have been looking for exotic dark matter particles for decades. NKE says dark matter is just the raw, weakly resonating early structure of the mesh slowly piling up.
Exactly. It's the primordial snow slowly packing together over eons. But eventually, in a localized region of the infinite mesh, this dark matter snow aggregates so densely, and the internal drag pressure becomes so immense that the structure simply cannot hold. The crust of this massive aggregation violently bursts.
And this is bang number one.
This is the Big Bang.
So the Big Bang wasn't the creation of the entire infinite universe from a single point. It was just a localized pressure explosion within the pre-existing eternal Busfo mesh, like a single firecracker going off inside a massive football stadium.
Yes, the Big Bang was simply the first forging furnace. The extreme pressure and heat of this localized explosion forces those simple dark matter resonances to smash together and combine into stronger, tighter, much more complex chords. This furnace creates what we call light matter protons, neutrons, hydrogen, and helium.
Okay, so bang one gives us hydrogen, but a universe of just hydrogen gas is pretty boring. We are still a long way from a human being. The mesh has to fold in on itself again, right? We need another pressure cooker. What's bang two?
Bang 2 is what the text calls the mid-bang. In traditional cosmology, we call these supernovae.
Exploding stars.
Right. The hydrogen and helium from the Big Bang slowly clump together over billions of years to form massive early stars. Inside the core of these stars, the drag pressure is exponentially higher than it was in the Big Bang. When these massive stars reach the end of their lives, they collapse and explode.
The mid-bang.
This is the mid-bang. The pressure in that microsecond of explosion is so intensely violent that it forces the hydrogen resonances to combine into incredibly complex, highly stable, heavy chords.
The 95 stable chemical elements.
Yes. Carbon, oxygen, iron, gold, silicon. None of them existed after the Big Bang. They are all entirely forged in the localized furnaces of the mid-bangs.
So we've gone from absolute nothingness to a virtual split, to a vibrating mesh, to dark matter clumps, to a Big Bang that makes hydrogen, to a mid-bang that makes carbon and iron. We have the building blocks, but we aren't done. What is the final bang? What is bang 3?
Bang 3 is the small bang. This is the formation of specific localized solar systems like ours, which occurred roughly 4.7 billion years ago. The heavy elements from the mid-bangs drift and aggregate into planets. On a rocky planet like Earth, a physical crust of rock granite forms over a molten core.
A literal crust this time, not a virtual one.
A literal crust. This rock crust acts as an ultimate containment vessel. It traps the elemental resonances, traps the energy, the heat, and the water, creating a highly enclosed, stable, pressurized crucible. And it is only within this stable, long-term crucible of the small bang that the elemental resonances can interact safely enough to achieve their most delicate, fragile, and astronomically complex combinations.
Organic chemistry, RNA biology.
And eventually, us.
It is an incredibly cohesive narrative arc. It takes you from literally zero to a human being listening to a deep dive without ever once having to invent a magic particle or a divine creator or a new force. It's just the exact same basic nothingness vibration folding in on itself over and over again under increasing pressure. And this is a massive but.
I sense the skepticism.
I have to be skeptical. This is a beautiful, logical bridge over the swamp. But if this entire theory is purely conceptual, if it's based entirely on circumstantial logic, anto-analogies, and the swamp model, how can we ever actually know if it's true?
It's the ultimate question.
Especially since we started this entire discussion by acknowledging that Gödel proved we can never mathematically prove it. It feels like we've built this gorgeous, intricate castle in the clouds, but we have absolutely no way to test if the foundation is actually touching the ground. Are we just guessing?
It is the ultimate crisis of epistemology. How do you know what you know?
Hmm.
The author of NKE grappled with this exact crisis of truth. In fact, he did something highly unorthodox for a theoretical physics manuscript. He brought in artificial intelligence to independently test his logical planks.
Yes, the Grok anecdote. I absolutely love this part of the text. It's wild. He literally fed his logical premises, his lemma, into a large language model named Grok and asked it a direct question. Based on logic, do you believe a true theory of everything is possible, and what must it structurally look like?
And Grok's response is a fascinating validation of the methodology. The AI analyzed traditional top-down physics, specifically targeting string theory, and essentially roasted it.
Roasted it. Grok explicitly called string theory a math sculpture. I mean, that is a brutal takedown from an AI. It pointed out that string theory relies on 26 or more free parameters.
For context, free parameters are numbers in an equation that cannot be derived from the theory itself. The physicist literally has to measure the universe, find a number, and plug it into the math by hand just to make the equations balance.
Grok validated the author's exact realization. If you have 26 arbitrary knobs you have to twist by hand to make your universe model work, you do not have a fundamental theory of everything. You have a highly customized, artificial, top-down model.
Right.
Grok confirmed, using pure logic analysis, that a true toe must be completely bottom-up. It must be 100% emergent. It must start with zero assumptions and naturally derive gravity, forces, and particles entirely without human patching. It agreed that the NKE framework is exactly the kind of logical structure required.
Which is an incredible endorsement. So Grok basically looked at our swamp, looked at the planks we laid down with NKE, and agreed this is the most logically sound bridge across.
But that still leaves us with a human problem.
Yes, it does.
Even if an AI says your logic is sound, how do we, as a scientific society, accept this as truth? If we can't have Gödel's 100% mathematical certainty, aren't we just perpetually living in doubt?
This is where the author introduces a vital philosophical concept. It is a framework for living and doing science within an emergent, unprovable universe. He introduces the concept of TAW, T-A-W, which stands for temporary absolute Wahrheit. Temporary absolute truth.
Temporary absolute truth. That sounds like an oxymoron. How can something be an absolute truth if it's temporary?
It is a practical, functional necessity. The text argues that we must act like the detective. We gather all available evidence, every observation from telescopes, every particle collision at CERN, every logical deduction. We fit it into the NKE framework. If the framework successfully explains everything perfectly without a single contradiction, we declare it the absolute truth. We plant our flag in the swamp and we operate daily as if it is undeniably 100% real. It allows us to build technology, to teach, to function.
But with a massive caveat built into the name.
Exactly. The temporary part is the safety valve of intellectual honesty. It means we cannot become dogmatic. If tomorrow a new experiment produces an anomaly, a physical behavior that the NKE logic absolutely cannot explain the truth, immediately loses its absolute status. It is exposed as a temporary truth.
That's like a software patch. You are running version 1.1 of the truth. You find a bug. You pull up the logical plank. You modify the theory to incorporate the new data without breaking the lemma, and then you establish version 1.2, a new temporary absolute truth.
And mathematically, the author notes something deeply comforting about this process. As we iterate these temporary truths, the gap between our ta and the actual, fundamentally unknowable ultimate truth of the universe shrinks asymptotically toward zero.
We get closer and closer.
We get closer and closer and closer. It may never be a perfect deductive proof, but it becomes functionally indistinguishable from reality, allowing us to understand our universe without being forever paralyzed by philosophical doubt.
So what does this all mean? We have gone on an incredible reality-bending journey today. We started at the edge of a murky swamp, realizing that the old tools of 20th century physics, the perfect math proofs, and the top-down equations couldn't build a path to the actual origin of reality.
We had to leave them behind.
We stripped away all of our human assumptions down to the absolute featureless nothingness. We watched an infinitely thin virtual crust separate and collapse, creating an orphaned vibration that birthed time and space. We scaled up through the self-limiting traffic jam drag of gravity, through the dark matter forges of the Big Bang, the elemental factories of supernovae, and finally to the granite crucible of Earth that cooked up the 95 stable elements making up your biological body.
It is a breathtaking, unbroken chain of pure emergence. It connects the absolute void to the present moment. But before we wrap up, there is one final, perhaps the most provocative and challenging thought drawn directly from the source text.
Let's hear it.
It concerns something we haven't touched on yet, but which is deeply fundamentally personal to every single listener: human consciousness.
Ah, yes. The ghost in the machine. The ultimate mystery.
The author explicitly warns against the human ego infecting our physics. Throughout history, we have always tried to make ourselves special. The text states that NKE believes there is absolutely no distinct layer 4 of human consciousness.
Wait. No special layer for the soul. No quantum consciousness magic operating outside of physics.
None whatsoever. The theory strictly dictates that consciousness is not a magical property inserted into biology from the outside by a creator. It is not a fundamental underlying force of the universe. According to the strict logic of NKE, your consciousness, your inner monologue, your sense of self, your feelings of love and fear, is just another highly complex, incredibly stable resonance loop vibrating the exact same Busfo mesh that creates the dirt in your garden, the gravity holding you down, and the light from the stars.
We aren't special. We are just a more complicated chord in the exact same symphony.
Exactly. The very same blind process that limits the speed of light and forged iron in the heart of a dying star is currently looping inside the neurons of your brain, maintaining the structured nothingness that allows you to experience the illusion of a solid reality.
I want you, the listener, to do something right now. Look at your hand. Really look at it. Or, if you're driving, just listen to the sound of your own inner voice narrating your thoughts. I want you to imagine that hand and that voice not as solid, indestructible biological matter, and not as some ethereal, detached spirit. Imagine it as an intricately structured symphony of pure nothingness, a cascading, impossibly complex sequence of orphaned vibrations, maintaining their delicate shape against the infinite void, simply because it is the only thing they can do.
It is a profoundly humbling perspective and yet simultaneously deeply unifying. You are not separated from the universe by some magical boundary of consciousness. You are the universe itself. You are the cosmos's most complex, emergent expression of its own fundamental vibration, experiencing itself.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It is a massive amount of conceptual weight to process. And as Arndt Meichelmeier reminds us with version 1.1, this is an ongoing collaborative journey. So keep looking at the world around you, keep laying down those logical planks, keep asking those dangerously childlike questions, and never ever stop questioning the reality you find yourself in.